today we are talking about the lottery of love. This is something I've talked lots of times about, the fairy tale framework. And people always say, yeah, yeah, but I don't think almost anyone recognizes how deep that really goes. 70% of all our neural network is wired up by the age of 7. So a neural network is when two neurons connect and they form a neural pathway. And so that's basically how we think. It's basically the when you initially walk, you have to be able to move, and that's, you connect like a network of pathway of muscle memory and neurology that enables you to do that. So if you think about life before the age of 7, most of us are like, we don't know anything that's going on in the world. And so we listen to everyone else. It's like adults seem to know everything. They seem to be this kind of person that has all the secrets and they know how everything works. I can remember being young and hearing something and recognizing for the first time that adults didn't know everything. And I can remember in primary school, I think our teacher was teaching us something about Romans or something like that. And then I remember going round to somewhere historical and realizing that she told us something completely false, but I was in my 20s before I recognized it. Has everyone had that kind of experience where you've been told something by someone that you believed when you were little, and then when you get to late teens, adults, you realize that they told you something that was wrong?
Yes, Santa Claus.
Yeah, it's a good one. I had that with my daughters. I was like, I don't know that I want to lie to them about it. And because I think I know, like, it's a bit of fun, but what are you teaching them? You're teaching them that you can't be trusted. So yeah, there's all these kind of things. Nicole, did you have another example? There's lots of things, and I think if you look back, you'll probably see examples. So, and oftentimes adults will give us a simplified version of something because our brain isn't fully developed. We can't understand. I think it's something like 25 or 27 by the time our brain is fully matured. And so, like, there's reasons, like teenagers are particularly bad at judging road distance because they haven't got, there's some distance perception or something that they haven't quite, it isn't formed until your 20s. And so even teenagers aren't fully capable of understanding all the complexities. Like, anyone who's got a teenage son or daughter knows, like, they think they know everything, and you can see, like, my daughters are 20 and 22, and they're like, oh yeah, we understand this so much more than our teens. And I'm like, yeah. But they assume that they know better than, like, oh, this your generation did everything wrong. So this neurology, all these neural connections are being set before we're able to understand the world. And so when you look at 7, like, your basic model of how you deal with relationships, what you believe and what you expect about relationships, is set by the age of 7. So you will override some things, but it takes a lot of effort and attention and energy to override something that's already in your neurology. So Stan Tatkin does a lot of work on his specialty is like attachment theory. For anyone who doesn't know attachment theory is the idea from John Bowlby initially that how your first caregiver, like usually your mum or maybe your dad or whoever looked after you, like the very first person when you were helpless, how responsive they are to your needs determines your attachment style, which determines how much you're going to trust other people and how much you think the world is a safe and secure place or insecure and won't meet your needs. And so there are, they talk about 4 main attachment styles. So secure is if you have someone like you cry and like a baby cries to communicate, and someone comes along and looks after you, then consistently, then you have a secure attachment. So then life is much easier because you expect, okay, people are generally good. Someone out there will look after me. So when you go into a relationship, and so attachment theory has been extended. I think it was Sue Johnson that did it first, but Sue Johnson and Stan Tatkin are the two biggest people who look at attachment theory in relationships. So Sue Johnson says, when you're in a relationship, what everyone's really asking is, can I trust you? Will you be there for me? Do you really care about me? And so we're like children within a relationship because we're looking at our partner as being the new person, like whereas say our mom or whoever initially looked after us, they were the ones that we put all our trust in. And being in a romantic relationship, when you're in this partnership or this life partner, you're putting your trust in this other person. So Stan Tatkin says that a relationship is really an interaction of 2 nervous systems. And depending on how those nervous systems are wired up, depends on the level of drama, depends on the level of neediness, depends on the level of insecurity and anxiety. So people who with secure attachment styles generally find relationships much easier. People with anxious attachment styles are always scared and worried that the person doesn't really love them, isn't really going to be there for them. And these are the people that will push people away by, are you really there? Are you really there? And they'll set tests which create a lot of drama because what they're wanting is constant reassurance. Because the world it seemed like the world didn't care. It seemed like the person that was supposed to care for them didn't care about their needs. They now feel anxious that their partner won't care for their needs. So it's so a relationship with someone who's got anxiously attached is going to be much more challenging. They're going to need a lot of reassurance. So it doesn't mean that they can't do relationships, but what it means is they need a partner that will be reassuring, be sensitive to them. Dr. Mario Martinez talks about healing, and he says relational wounds come from relationship and have to be healed in a relationship. And so he talks about the 3 core wounds of shame. So like, for example, if your parents made you feel shame, then you want to be in a relationship where you feel honored. So like the person accepts who you are, and there it kind of like heals the shame that someone else put in, that addresses it. If you've been betrayed, then you need loyalty. So shame, betrayal, and abandonment. So if you've been abandoned, right, I'll mix them up, but the opposite. So loyalty goes with abandonment, and honor this with shame, and there's another one that goes with betrayal, but basically it's where someone displays the exact opposite behavior and shows you that you feel that you're worthy and that they're going to be there for you.
Whose work was that, Rob?
Sorry?
Whose work was that? What was the name, please?
The healing, the fields of healing is Dr. Mario Martinez.
Mario Martinez, thank you.
Mario. Okay, so people who are anxious are going to need a lot more reassurance, and they're going to need someone who's more understanding. People who are avoidant are really difficult for relationships because these are the people that will push people away. And because they'll be afraid of being too close, they'll be afraid of being dependent. And then there's another one of anxious avoidant, or people who are anxious and avoidant. So the problems in relationships are really about the neurology, which is really about what's wired into the system of the beliefs, the assumptions, and the expectations that you have of a relationship. And so most of those are wired up by the age of 7. So, okay, so let's just think about what creates an emotion.
Experience.
What do you mean? Can you give us a little bit more?
It's basically what something it's triggered, but most of the times if you're experiencing something what make you feel great, you actually got the good hormones. So the good feeling, good emotions. When you got something what it's make you insecure or anxious, you actually start fearing, and you start feel very, anxious.
Okay. So it's experience, but what creates the experience?
It's an external stimulus.
Okay, so one point is the external stimulus. So it's the what you experience. But if you just experience, like I'm Janos, you always like be present, experience. Okay, so that's one point.
Memories.
Yeah, it can be memories. So that's but it's memories of an experience.
They
So-
perceive things.
Memories of our past conditioning.
Yeah. So the memories recreates the same experience. Sorry, Nicole, what did you say?
We said about perception, that I perceive things.
Yes, so, kind of. So it's really about. So it's about how we perceive it, and what our expectations are. So if the experience meets or exceeds our expectation, we have a great experience. Like if the reality meets or exceeds our expectations, we have a great experience. If it's less than our expectations, then it's negative.
Yeah, but that's the boxing method. When we do boxing something, that's make me feel good, that's make me feel bad. But when you do creating more like experience, you're not putting expectation, you actually just go with the flow. You get to the flow mode. And when you get to the flow mode, you actually don't create expectation, because here I am, let's see it, what we get.
Yes. So what you're talking about is really like this heightened state of mindfulness, like meditation, where you let go of your thoughts and you feel great.
But that only
Yeah.
happens if you're confident. You have to be confident that it is going to be a good experience, that it is not going to be harmful.
Well, I think that like the whole process of meditation, what you're doing is you're dropping your expectations and you're dropping your perception, and you're just pure experience, which I think you're talking about, Janos. And so we feel great when we let go of the expectations. But so when we have a negative, it's because of how we're judging with our expectations, and it's also our perception.
When you
So-
say it's perception, do you mean it's about the story or the narrative? In other words, it's the meaning that we create, that we attach
Yeah.
to the event.
Yes. So really, it's about. So I was talking about. There's never been more access to single people. There's never been more single people. There's never been. Like we used to live in 150 in a village of 150 people where there were 2 or 3 other people eligible. Now we have the choice of everyone, and yet people are saying there's no good men, no good women out there. So what happens is that we don't see reality as it is. We see reality through our perceptual filters.
That's a very good, you last time described it like we only see through our eyes 1%, and whatever it's our mind state. So it depends how our mood or feeling, how we choose to be. That's what filling up the 99%. So if I'm anxious or if I'm angry, I will see everything anger around me. Doesn't matter the word or not, but I got that feeling. And opposite, if I'm in the good mood, I can see everything very great just because of my mind state.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything is out there in life, but there is, I think it's something like 3 billion pieces of data that we're processing every moment. And obviously that would overwhelm us. So from the principle of cognitive economy, what we do is we focus on what seems to be most relevant. And people always use the example, this is the reticular cortex, of we pick up on what's relevant. So if I said, what's the temperature of the room? And you think about it, you suddenly become aware of the temperature where maybe it wasn't relevant. If you're, like the example everyone always uses, is if you're going to go and buy a car, you start seeing all those cars. Now those cars are always there, but you just weren't picking up on it because it wasn't relevant to you. And so, like Yanis has said, you pick up on whatever you're expecting. So when you expect to be, when you expect that all men are bastards, you come across all the bastards. When you expect that, like whatever you can think of, you can find evidence for it. So one of the main sources of research and evidence for this is jury witness testimonies. And so you can have 5 or 10 people who've witnessed the same event, and they'll go into court and they'll give 5 or 10 different accounts, because what we remember is different from what other people remember, because we were in a different state. We were focused on something else. We were seeing something else. And it's been proven that what we recall of something isn't what's actually there, but half the time it's what we expect it to be there. So you've seen those, like you have these optical illusions of all you can see is this, and then someone shows you, okay, but there's this, and then all you can see is that. And is there like that trainer, isn't it? There's like pink or blue or something. Like some people see it as pink, some people see it as blue, because it's the people have different levels of perception. Like even we believe things because we see it in our own eyes.
It's the whole sense perception, isn't it? Just sense, smell, hear, touch, taste, everything around you.
And because we think if we see something, it's concrete, it's there. But actually, all the eyes do is manage light, and it all goes, it just sends data into the brain, and then the brain makes sense of what it is we're actually seeing. So the filters for the brain are what we believe and what we expect.
But the understanding is that there are several realities anyway. So if that's the case, it is framed by your experiences, what you actually see, and also your physical limitations. So it's not any one thing, it's a combination of all of those different things.
Yeah. So like if you're looking at a dating site, the whole world is on a dating site. There's good people, bad people, all of these things, but so who we'll meet, how we'll perceive who we meet, depends, because a different person would activate a different, and this isn't like saying like you're doing something wrong, but it means people are different with different people. And so what you expect activates a certain level in them of how they respond. And so it's a dance. And so there's no one set, do this, do this, do this, but it's about awareness of the dance and sensitivity to it. Okay. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Before you go, Rob, though, one question. What about people who block receiving information, receiving, yeah, they're not receptive to whatever stimuli is coming their way. They block.
as in people who never learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. People stay stuck because they have their story of life and they don't want to accept another story. So, for example, when people go through a breakup, it's painful because it's the shattering of one world and then you have to recreate a new world. And so the pain of a breakup is because you've tied your future and your perception of the future with this person. That person's gone, so your future seems to be gone. And so the way that you heal from a breakup is you create a future that's brighter, and then you develop the belief in that, in getting to that future. So some people stay stuck, and they stay stuck for 20 years. And I remember talking to someone, and she was in great pain, and it had been 7 years or something since she'd broken up, and she said, well, he was the love of my life. I said, but how do you know he was the love of your life? You still got more of your life to live. She goes, oh, no, he's the love of my life. I said, well, what if you met someone and you loved him more? They go, oh, no, I couldn't, because that would mean that this relationship didn't mean much. I go, well, what would that mean if it didn't mean much? It would mean I'd wasted 20 years. And so she was stuck for 7 years, and she would probably be stuck for another 20 years because she won't let that information in, because she won't change the reality. So pain, emotional pain, is when our expectation or our story, we won't change our story, and the reality shows us something else. So if this is our experience, like this is what we're experiencing, like what reality shows us, but our story remains here, well, there's a gap, and that the stress, the pain is in between the gap, and the reality isn't going to change. And if we don't change our story, then we're just going to remain stuck. So it's our story that holds us back from what we want. And when people are too attached to their story, they can't learn, they can't move on.
But is it about the pain or not knowing how to deal with the pain? That's the issue.
Well, again, it's individual, but usually it's about a deep fear. It's about something really meant something. I don't want to look at this. So this is a great generalization. I'm no expert on depression. However, like I have an opinion, and what I've noticed from working with people who are depressed is that usually there's deep down a fear that I'm not a good person. Because I'm not a good person, I don't want to look at that too closely, and anything that looks too closely is too scary. And so the fear stops them from looking at it, which, and of course there's more, it's a lot more complicated than that, as in there's chemistry and all of these other things. But people who stay stuck, it tends to be like the fear of looking at themselves honestly.
But Rob,
And
is
that fear,
changing your story one of the hardest things to do?
sorry?
Changing your story, having a new story, that's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, okay, so like Yanis is talking about, if you just let go of that story, all is great. But the reason why most people can't do that, most people can't achieve like peace in meditation and all of those things, is because of fear. It's because there's a fear, and that fear creates like it's like mental fidgeting, and all of these things, so that you're not able to be at peace. So yeah, ultimately, I think if you got rid of fear, all you'd have is that great experience. You'd have love, happiness. So for me, emotion is the intense, the amount of like, there's this energy of life, which is like happy, love, whatever you want to call it. But that runs through a kaleidoscope of fear. And in the level of intensity of the fear determines the emotion. Okay, so there is the triune brain theory, which means that really we evolved. So we've evolved. So the most primitive animals, say like crocodiles and reptiles, and so they have a reptilian brain. And so basically, a reptilian brain is about hunger, danger. So everything that you need. So like if someone was to like suffocate you, you'd respond from the reptilian brain. So then the next level is the limbic brain, which is what creates things like where things like belonging, status, control, power, all of those dynamics are kind of from the limbic brain. And then we've got the cerebral cortex, which is where we think. So we're all here working from our cerebral cortex. So this is an intellectual understanding. When you read a book, it's from an intellectual understanding. But when you're in fear, like when your life's in danger, you're reacting from the reptilian brain, and that's always going to override the cerebral cortex. When it looks like you don't belong, when it feels like you've been rejected, when it feels like you've been like you're the one left out of the group, when it feels like someone's challenged your status of being capable, when it looks like someone's stealing the credit at work, when it looks like someone's controlling you, when it looks like you feel limited, when you feel powerless, that's always going to override your intellectual understanding. So when we talk about these things, or you read something, then you learn it and you go, yeah, that makes sense. But we don't do it. And we don't do it because the neurology overrides what we understand. Okay, so does that make sense?
It is, but don't you think also the codependency can be override a lot of things?
Sorry, say that again.
The codependency. People are so much codependent.
Codependency.
Yes.
Yeah, well, codependency comes from the neurology, because that's deeply wired into the neurology. So yeah, all of those things. So if you've been in a relationship, at some point you've acted like a child and recognized that you're acting like a child in the playground. And that's because of the neurology. It's because you felt rejected, because you felt your status was under threat, because you felt controlled, because you felt that you didn't belong. Because all of those were threatened, you react emotionally. And it doesn't matter how mature we are intellectually, emotionally is what drives what we do. Because in order to react intellectually, we've got to be calm, first of all. We've got to have time to think about it. And we rarely have. In a relationship, most of it is response, automatic. It's this happens, I feel this happens, I react. And so no one has time, with how busy our lives are, to be able to react intellectually. We can later think about it and think, well, why did I do that? That was stupid. But we react from the reptilian or limbic system most of the time. Okay, so okay, so let's talk about love isn't love, the idea of love as a lottery. So when we look at a relationship, what we understand of relationships, we're looking at it was wired up by the age of 7, most of it. So how do we understand relationships at the age of 7? Well, what we really learned was from Disney films and fairy tales. And so basically the fairy tale is prince and princess meet, they fall in love, and they live happily ever after. So what we really learn from that is 4 lessons from the fairy tale, is that there's one out there for all of us, that if you meet the one and you're beautiful enough on that day or gallant enough, you'll fall in love. And if the love is true, you'll live happily ever after. And so the path to true love is to meeting the one and being beautiful enough or gallant enough on that day. So really there's the problems with this is that, okay, so on day 1, we talked about the normal curve of a relationship. And so the normal curve of a relationship goes like that. So initial high and then it drops down. And we're talking about to change that to have it to be more level or even go up. So what really happens is when it goes down, couples feel like they have no pathway. They don't know how to resolve a problem. Because even you can look at the setup of relationships. People, we can see what people value by how they spend their money. And when you look at relationships, the average wedding is £32,000. How many people spend, and there's some American study of like the average time in planning a wedding, something like 400 hours. And so then there's like the engagement ring is like, was it 2,500, 4,000 or something like that? But who spends any money preparing for a relationship? Like knowing the skills and how to make the marriage work, not just a wedding day. So couples go into a relationship with no understanding or expectation of there to be problems and how to, or any pathway of how to deal with problems. So what happens when there's a problem is that people say, well, that mustn't be the one. Or it's like, when you look at what people do when their relationship's going wrong and they want it to save it, is initially they'll go on like a makeover, or they'll start hitting the gym and they'll think, oh, he must, typically for a woman, he must have lost interest in me. Or a man feels it's like, okay, I've been dutiful and I've given her, like I've given her everything she wants and she's bored of me now. She doesn't respect me anymore. So people do that because they think being loved, like deep in their neurology, and I'm not talking intellectually, but I'm talking about this is how we're wired up, is to think if we're not loved, it's because we're not beautiful enough, or for a man, we're not gallant and not powerful enough. So there's no pathway for couples to fix something. They just think, oh, we just grew apart, we just lost connection, we're incompatible. But all of these aren't the real symptom. They're the way we explain something that the dynamic that's happening.
I don't think people are prepared to fight for their relationships. They don't go into a relationship and prepare to fight for them, and to get down to explore the reasons why it's gone wrong, and go into depth with what it was like at the beginning and what's happened along that journey and where it went wrong and who's maybe interfered with it, and the ins and outs of everything. And to go on for long enough, I think they give up at the first 1 or 2 hurdles and then stop, instead of going on and on and on and continue through the fight.
I think you're right. I think they do give up, but I think the reason that they don't is because even the ones that do try then realize that they don't have any way of fixing it, because and what it really is, they don't believe it will work, and often it doesn't, even for the ones that persist, because they don't have a pathway. They don't really know what to address, because you often hear people say, oh yeah, we're working on a relationship, or I'm working on myself. But what do? Like, they don't, there's no like, okay, here's the KPIs of what I'm going to do. Here's what's going to make the difference. I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. It's kind of a vague thing. I'm working on myself. What does that mean?
I think it means like they're trying to work out, they're in their own head and process where they may have gone wrong themselves.
Yeah.
In the relationship.
So I think like they genuinely do, but it's with relationships, I think we have a medieval mindset. So by that I mean that if you looked 300 years ago, so like now we got this coronavirus, back when we had the plague, everyone, it wasn't a medical issue, because people thought it was a damnation from God, and so when you look about 300 years ago, not many people went to a doctor. People went to like the local witch. People went to their priest, and this is where priests were selling indulgences, and priests were like, go and do 10 Hail Marys and 5 Our Fathers, and your son will be better. So medicine only grew when people believed that medicine offered a solution. And then when there's lots of research, and so between that time and now, we've now got vaccines. So the population grew 7 times in the last 120 years, because we've got sanitation and vaccinations that now mean that most children live. Whereas if we look about 300 years ago, I think it was most parents would lose maybe 3 or 4 children on average. So it changed when we understood what the cause was. So even in, I think it's 1920, when Semmelweis said that if doctors would just wash their hands in childbirth, that we'd get rid of infections. And it took 20 years for doctors to do that, because they didn't believe, and because they didn't want, they didn't believe it would work. They didn't want the hassle, and they didn't want it. They didn't want to admit the blame that they'd caused the deaths up till now. So when you look at how medicine has developed in the last 2 centuries, there's been huge change. Like now we have genetic understanding. We can mark out who's likely to have something. We can do surgeries that we couldn't do. We've got we can deal with like with antibiotics. We can deal with infections. But when you look at relationships, so we have this body of knowledge about medicine, but where's the body of knowledge about relationships? so psychology, you would look for it to come from psychology, but psychology as a discipline is only 150 years old. And for the early part of psychology, it was mostly focused on intelligence, individual differences, mental health, child development, all the kind of things, because if you look at school, where in a curriculum is there any understanding or teaching about relationships? And there's none, because schools are set up for the good of society, meaning who can become an economically productive citizen. Your happiness, your relationships are seen as down to you. So really, relationship research is probably the last 20 years. I know John Gottman's been going for about 40 years, but there's, even if you look at, say, John Gottman, who's probably done more research in relationships, John Gottman and Steve Duck, probably than anyone else. And John Gottman, all he did was data until he met his wife, because he had no way of interpreting it. He was just the maths, correlations, and what was, like identifying all these factors. That he was great at that. But it was only his wife, who had years of therapy, that put together the story that enabled them to make any use of all of that data. Because before, all they were doing was publishing, okay, this happens, there's the mathematical correlation. So as a society, we haven't valued relationships, because relationships are for the individual. And so the story of, if you look at, so the average rate of divorce, and it changes depending on the time and the statistics, but I'm trying to get that the sun. But on average, there's about a 55% divorce rate. So I'm thinking about Matthew Syed wrote a great book called Black Box Thinking, and in it he talked about how, I think, as I remember, it was like the airline fault rate, like airline crashes and things, faults that led to airline crashes, and medical, like faults of medical staff were, I think they had quite similar rates, or anyway, but he looked at airline crashes went from having a spate of them to almost none now. Whereas in the medical field, there's still pretty much the same error rate. And the reason was that airlines Medit, they changed their culture so it stopped being blame. So if there was, and they encouraged pilots and airline staff to tell them about near misses. Whereas if a doctor had a near miss, they wouldn't, okay, generalization, but they generally wouldn't share it, because they would be judged. It would lower their status. It would make it seem like they were lesser. And so what airlines did was they didn't blame pilots or staff, because another thing that they found was that because of the hierarchy, the ground staff on or the staff on a plane could see crashes coming, but wouldn't say anything. Like in black boxes, they were able to see that other people were picking up on signs, but they weren't saying anything, because because they assumed this pilot knew, but the pilot was just having an off day, or just wasn't switched on, and so ended up killing the whole plane load, because they didn't want to challenge him. And so what the airlines did was they made it, I can't remember exactly, but they created the system that all staff have to log when they see something. And so they created a culture where they could give feedback to the pilot and it wouldn't be like, who do you think you are telling me that? And so what happened is they minimized air crashes. So that airline safety is really like minimal accidents because they created a system that didn't create blame. So whereas in the medical field, they haven't done that so much because there is that hierarchy. People aren't like seen as lower status. It isn't taken so well to be able to challenge or respond to. Yes, so that culture. Okay, so how does this relate to relationships? Well, if you look at our legal system, so when someone gets married, it becomes legal because we involve the state. So you marry, you have to get a license. It then becomes a legal contract. So then it's not just two people, but it's also the government or society. And so the legal system works on blame. Blame, therefore, means that someone is at fault if a relationship doesn't work. And I know, like, you have the quickie divorce, but that's the basic structure that we have. So to get a divorce, unless you use the quickie, it means you have to prove who was at fault. So when relationships end, so like this is something we never really normally think about, but it shows the underlying psyche in which relationships are. So even if it's a relationship and you haven't got married, there's this thing of like, what happened? And you have to have a story. So many people, and this is relevant, Sarah, to what you're talking about, but many people, like, couples therapy has quite poor results. And what they found was that couples that go to therapy, it isn't necessarily that effective in saving the marriage, but what it does is it creates the story. So if you've been in a relationship and then you break up and you go back out dating, you don't really want to say, well, I was a shit husband and I cheated and I lied and I drank and I was abusive. You have to have some kind of story. So people have this story after a breakup. It's a story, like people talk about it as closure. It's some story of why it came to an end. And so this is where people come in with, like, it was incompatible, or we grew apart, or something like that. But the story that people have isn't necessarily why the relationship broke. When you look at it fundamentally, a relationship broke because it wasn't working for one or both parties. And so that's the long downward slope. So the behavior that creates the final break isn't necessarily the first cause of the breakup. It was like that it was draining and it was no longer worth being in. So if you have 55%, like if 55% of surgeries didn't work out, 55% of airlines ended in crashes, we don't blame all surgeons, we don't blame all pilots. We say that there's a systemic problem. But when we're looking at individual relationships, because they all seem to have different causes, different situations, on the surface, they all look individual. So we say, oh, it's because that person was a shit, it was because they were the wrong people, it was in the wrong situation. So it looks like a whole myriad of excuses or a whole myriad of reasons. But really, what it is that there's a systemic problem. And the systemic problem is the framework that we're operating from, that we do relationships from. So this systemic like idea, the framework that we do relationships from, is the thing that's flawed, and yet everyone's going around. And so when you add that into like the general, there's a general fear about relationships, that I'll never have a relationship and that will work, and I'll always end up alone and unloved. And that fear creates a lot of anxiety around relationships. And so then what happens is people's experience feeds into that, and they go, well, what's wrong with me? Well, didn't I get the memo about relationships? Am I unlovable? Is there something wrong with me that I can't make relationships work? And so everyone's looking at themselves, and no one's looking at the whole systemic framework that we're from. So it's a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes, where, you know, like the story of the emperor, and he's told that only clever people can see this, and he goes out naked, and everyone's going like, well, anyone who thinks he's naked is stupid. And so we're like that in relationships. We're like, yeah, it's me. What am I doing wrong? Why isn't it working for me? And no one's ever questioning the emperor, like the emperor's framework. So it's the problem of what's wired into our neurology rather than us individually. So, okay, so the fairy tales, and what's wired into our neurology is that fairy tale. And so that leaves us with, there's no pathway to fixing. It also means that people get played. So when you look at relationships with narcissists and people like that, and sociopaths and all of that, it's because people believe that there's one out there, that people believe that they're going to fall in love, and this one person is going to be different from everyone else, and they're going to see something special in them, and it's all going to work. And because of that, what the unscrupulous person does is play that role, play into that story. People go into it, and even though they're not consciously thinking of it, it's what their neurology is wired up to respond to. So it also seems that love is out of your hands. And it also means, like, if you have to be beautiful enough, or you have to be, like, if there's this one person and you have this one chance to make it work, it's by impressing them there and then that puts a lot of pressure on every first date. It puts a lot of pressure on, what if I'm not good enough? What if I'm not beautiful enough? And it's actually what the cosmetic industry is driven on. It's what luxury cars are driven on. Because if men feel that if they don't have a big enough car, and they're not seem to have enough status, they're not a good enough hunter, then no one's going to love them. And so it leads to a lot of anxiety about relationships and interactions, because what if I screwed up my one chance? Okay, does that make sense?
You talked about the perception of beauty of self, but your perception of what is beautiful and would attract Prince Charming or Lady whoever may not be what is actually desirable, because you have created something in your head which does not play out for other people.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, you look at, and what's happened is, as media and social media have accelerated this, it's got to a state where no one can live up to, and women feel a pressure to look as good as these models that don't look as good as their pictures. And then you've got filters. So where I first understood all it, I didn't understand all of this, but where I first identified that some of this was, I used to have a gym, and in looking at why don't people stick to their like exercise and diet program, I trained in therapy, and I started using when people were interested in joining the gym. I used that as a chance to kind of practice therapy. And what I found was when you got to the root of why do people join gyms, and it's not everyone, but a lot of them join a gym because they're worried about their husband's looking at someone else. They're thinking of leaving their wife or vice versa. Or they've had a breakup, they're on the dating market and they want to get in shape and be in the best. Now, when someone leaves a relationship 15, 20, 30 years in, it's almost never about the looks. It's never about because there's a couple of extra pounds. It's about how they feel in the relationship. And yet the first thing that people do is like go to the gym, build up, get in shape, or have a makeover or change their hairstyle or something like that because they think that's going to spice things up. But it's never about that. The other person, it's about how they feel. And if you really spoke to the so typically why men will leave a relationship like 20 years in, been happy, they got kids, but after 20 years the kids and his wife are looking at him and he's just someone who puts out the rubbish, he's just someone who tells these silly old stories, and he feels that he's not respected. Someone else, maybe he's got a little bit of power at work and he's respected, and maybe there's someone younger that looks up to him and feels that they're going to learn from him, and feel like he seems so in control of things. He feels different because of like the adulation or the attention that he's getting, and he feels he's respected, he feels he's powerful, he feels better, and he'll walk out of a perfectly happy relationship, happy as in aside from he didn't feel as respected as he wanted. But really it's about, for men, like, and the generalization, men want respect, women want love, is that men have to understand that we're not special, we're just who we are. And women have to understand that, as in you're not going to be loved and put on a pedestal forever. It's a human to human relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So let's look at, so if that's the fairy tale framework, let's talk about the 4 relationship truths. And so the 4 relationship truths are relationships are a struggle. And so the biggest, I think my favorite relationship quote is that Dan Weil says, or the late Dan Weil said, when you marry someone, you marry a set of problems. So if you didn't marry this person, you wouldn't have these problems, but you'd have a different set. And so when you're choosing a partner, you're choosing a set of problems. And so you're choosing which problems you can live with. And the other quote I love about relationships is Mignon. Anyway, it's someone, but she said that no one's ever been loved in the way that everyone wants to be loved. And so I think when you're born, usually you come out of the world helpless and you're so cute and your parents fall in love with you and they shower you with adulation, and every time you do anything they go, oh, isn't he cute, isn't he wonderful? And so you get, like, wherever you go, like, everyone loves babies, or most people love babies, and babies, like most of what beauty is related to what a baby is, like big eyes, like smooth skin, all of those type of things that we're genetically wired to respond with love to a baby. So there's this thing that this baby goes around and is surrounded by this cocoon of love, where everywhere he goes, everyone thinks everything he does or she does is wonderful. And from then on, life is just downhill. It's like you get to 3, your parents are screaming at you, they're tired, they've had no sleep. You little shit, just get in there and do that. Behave, like don't do that. Who do you think you are? Shut up. All of this stuff. So like we're like, hang on, 3 years ago you thought I was wonderful. Now look, I'm not good enough. So we grow up feeling we're not good enough. Like, shut up. Who you talking out in school? Sit down. You're no different from everyone else in the class. Do as you're told. So we go from this adulation to like it's a drop. And I think what we're all craving from a relationship is that adulation that we had as a baby. We're looking for this partner that whatever we do, like that, what do we learn? We want unconditional love. What does unconditional love mean? Whatever we do, we put on this pedestal, and like you're this fantastic person. You are amazing. So, but that's not realistic. And when they've looked at, so when you looked at unconditional love, which in research they call agapic love, and they've tried to do studies on it, and they've had to abandon it because they couldn't find enough people capable of it. So maybe if you're Jesus, if you're Buddha, or if you're this enlightened being, you can love unconditionally, but most of us can't. And I'm not even sure that we necessarily should, because if you were going to love unconditionally, that would mean you would accept someone cheating on you, you would accept someone abusing you, you would accept all the kind of behavior that would make you miserable. And I'm just seeing a little bit of the chat. I've just seen get a dog. Yeah, I think that's why people do get pets. I'm going to pick up a puppy on Sunday, so maybe that's me. Yeah, I think that's why we love pets. It's why we love babies. So that's why relationships are a struggle, because of our story. And so when you look at, if we're operating, if our neurology is wired up from the fairy tale framework, then when someone leaves the cap off the toothpaste, when they leave the toilet seat up, it becomes, people react and it goes, if they really love me, they wouldn't. And it becomes like you wouldn't, the emotional responses to someone leaving the toilet seat up, to someone leaving their clothes on the floor, or a cap off the toothpaste, is out of alignment with the level of the problem. And it's because people aren't really fighting about that. They're fighting about, this means you don't love me. And there's that plays into that anxiety, which creates the strong emotions. And yet people continue to fight over the toothbrush and not how they really feel, because they don't want to be vulnerable, and they don't want to say, that makes me feel anxious that you really don't love me.
But couldn't it also be about self? If you're a tidy person and that is how you feel good about yourself and how you approach the world, and somebody constantly clutters up your order and creates disorder, it starts the day off on the wrong foot. You feel totally discombobulated and you are irritable because you cannot get yourself back in order, because this person becomes a creature at that point, just keeps on putting things and disturbing. Yes, nature tends to entropy, but this is not one state where you want to be in chaos. And there's this constant force that creates chaos in your desire for order. And you're always fighting for order. I like my desk clean. I like my things put away. And here is this person with the socks, the shoes. I rest my case. But so to me, it's two things. It's yes about the person, maybe your disgust and your annoyance of the person, and they, yeah, maybe if you loved me, you would listen to what I'm saying and do it. But also, I think from the individual, your personality is also under attack, and your ability to function properly comes under attack. And so you feel stressed, which means that there's a vicious circle that you're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, so your need to be tidy, to be organized, is wired into your neurology. So that's your individual wiring. So tomorrow, that's what we're talking about tomorrow. But yeah, but having said that, because you've obviously had this situation, you've obviously had this argument. So did you ever explain why? Or did you just react on the level of the clothes?
It's an odd thing, because for those of you who don't know me, the others know, I've been married for 34 years and lived with my husband for 10. And I've been in the UK on my own. So I'm very jealous of my space and my neatness. So which makes it even worse. But when I was in Jamaica, at first, it wasn't a problem because I had staff at home to clean up after him, so I didn't see it. Okay. Coming up here and him coming, and I felt like my space was invaded because we would spend Christmases together, the family would be together, you know, etc., etc. So he'd be here twice a year, and I had this feeling which I had to sort of say, no, calm down, behave yourself, be generous. But at times, and it wasn't all bad, because there are times when he would recognize and he would clean up and he'd wash up and he'd do all the rest of the stuff. But for me, at that time, I was going to school, I was working part-time, and my son was probably about 8, 9, 10 going on. Okay, so I was totally stressed out. So if I put something here, it means that I should be able to find it in my sleep. You know, when you're half asleep at 5 o'clock in the morning trying to get ready to go to, yeah. And if you have moved it and I cannot find it, it means that I'm losing time and I'm going to be late for the train. Okay, you get it.
Okay. So your stress is created by your story, because the train and all of these things. So yeah, so it's, and all of us, all of our rows, all of our emotions are created by a story. And so that, and what we've got is we've got two people with two different stories that may not be in completely different stories, completely different destinations. And we don't really know what those stories are, because we're operating and we're arguing about the clothes, we're arguing about the toothpaste, the toilet seat. We're not saying, you know, like, what do people argue about? People argue about money, sex, children. And they're not really arguing about money. They're arguing about what money means to them. So John Gottman was talked about this, is like, he asked people, okay, when you say money, what does money mean to you? Money means security, money means love, money means power, money means control. All of these things, money means freedom. All of these things, so people are talking about different things, but they're arguing about, you spent this and I think we should save it, but they're not talking about the story of, I believe that I need to have this amount of money in my bank account before I can feel safe. Or I need to spend this money because for me, spending money means showing love. And so people are arguing about the symbol, but not what the symbol means to them. So that's why relationships are a struggle. So they're a struggle because of the narrative. And if you let go of the narratives, then you can have better relationships. And so the path to happy ever after is letting go of the narratives. And so the next bit is that there are only really a few basic, so there's 7 basic problems in relationships. And those 7 problems are 7 skills. Now, in areas that we're more developed, we've got more of a body of knowledge in that field. There's less emotion. There's less like old housewives' tales, like, which is like in relationships. It's like the level of like the housewives' tales or the superstitious stuff. Oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. And when you're looking at, so we talked about like dating advice is often about you have to be someone different, and then we wonder why we're disconnected, because we're not connecting. Connection is human to human. And if you're pretending to be someone else, or you think this is the text I need to send, this is the dating profile I need to have, then you're creating a disconnection between you and who you're representing. And so people get into relationships with who they're representing, and then they wonder why they haven't got connection. So we also talked about emotion and logic. Emotion is why you get into a relationship. Emotion is how you know the quality of a relationship. But when you navigate the process of a relationship from emotion, then you're working from all of this anxiety, you're working from all of this drama. So logic is the way that you find your way. So if you look at a GPS system, if it worked on what was the prettiest route or the route that made you feel best, you'd never get to where you wanted to be. So it's about logic. It's about how to, like, what's the best route? What's the quickest route? Where's the most traffic? All of those things. So, okay, so we're looking now at, so we talked about, in the first one, we talked about connection is more important than a relationship. And it's about a relationship journey. Because if it's about a relationship, then you've got a fixed point. And so when you have two fixed points, you're stuck, because you can't move from this point, you can't move from this point. So you can only ever have one fixed point, because then you can navigate to it. So, for example, people will stay stuck because they won't let go of their narrative, and then they don't want the result that they're getting with their narrative. So the framework of the assumptions, the beliefs, and that framework sets us up for the results that we have. If we're not getting the results that we want, it's because of our framework. So if you don't change the framework or the narrative, and you're not happy with the results, well, you're stuck. You're stuck unhappy. But if you change this, then you can navigate to where this, to where you want to be. Does that make sense? I don't feel like I'm explaining that properly. So
you said there are only 7 basic problems in any relationships. Can you please elaborate which 7, please?
I will on Friday. That's Fridays. So basically 7 problems are when you break up. So there's basically 7 stages of the relationship journey. It's breakup, it's healing. If you don't heal properly, you're going to be afraid of the next relationship. Dealing with conflict is another. Finding a partner, so dating skills is one project. Building a relationship and connection is another project. So there's basically 7 points of a relationship. So being able to find a partner, and then being able to choose the right partner, being able to build a relationship, being able to deal with conflict, being able to heal, and being happy in yourself. So all of these are really a project. There's a process to go with every project. So it's just about finding what is the process. So if you're looking at dating, it's about knowing who you are and what kind of person you're going to need in a relationship, and how do you express yourself? How do you connect with humanity? How do you connect to people? And then another project is, when you're connecting with people and you're dating, how do you choose who the right person is? And so we talked about the criteria for that yesterday. So there's project, there's process, what's project, process, and then practices. So being able to deal with conflict is something. Being able to, we talked about, I think, about connection, and conversation is the point of developing connection. So, but conversation is a skill. It's a skill of being able to listen, properly listen, which is be present. And it's also about the, like we talked about, vulnerability of being able to share who you are. And because if you don't share who you are, eventually the connection is going to break. When you look with less emotion about relationships, and people don't like to, people look at relationships with such charged emotions that they feel that if you look at it logically, you're losing something. And when you examine why, it's like, oh, well, you're losing the romance. Well, the structure enables you the freedom to have the romance. Because if you want the romance without the foundation, then you'll have that. Helen Fisher talks about, we've got 3 drives. Sex drive, which gets us out meeting people. The romantic drive, which narrows from all the people I'm attracted to this one person that I'm going to fixate on and really want to develop a relationship with. And she talks about that. It seems to last about 3 years, which is about the honeymoon period, which is why relationships go like that. Because when the honeymoon period drops, people don't realize that, and they think they've fallen out of love. It isn't that they've fallen out of love, that's the biological process. But that in order to have that, the other relationship is the 3rd drive, is the drive for deep companionship, which is like the life partner. So there's a romantic, like people who've been married or been together 20 years are different than a couple that have been together 2 years. And it's just the fact of being together. You're not going to put, and this is one of the things, like the narrative means that we feel like if someone isn't putting us on a pedestal and adoring us, we feel that they don't love us anymore. It's that the love has changed, it's evolved. And so when you look at an 80-year-old couple that are still in love, it's because they have the deep companionship. It's not the romantic, it's a different kind of love. It's not the romantic type of love. Doesn't mean that you can't be romantic, doesn't mean you can't have a passionate relationship, but it's not that obsessive type of thing. And a lot of people are looking to recreate that constantly obsessive, like people who date for a while and there's all this excitement, oh God, and they're talking about how excited they are about this person. And then you talk to them again and go, oh, it just died down. And then, but I've met this other person and it just gives me butterflies. That kind of thing, that's not sustainable, because you can't feel that way. It's like if you have a new car, you can be all excited about it, or new computer or new shoes or new game or whatever you're excited about. You can be excited about it for a while, but after a while it habituates. So it's a different feeling. And a lot of people, as Sarah was saying, a lot of people give up, and a lot of people give up because they mistake the butterflies and the obsessive romantic thoughts as being love, rather than it being a stage to lead you into deeper love. So just to finish off then, there are really three keys, 3 elements to a relationship. There's you, there's your partner, and there's how you interact together. And so any problem is going to come from one of those. And often it's us. Often we go into a relationship, like we're in a relationship and we're feeling bad and we don't really know why we feel bad, but when we feel bad, we typically look to blame. And we look at blame, well, why am I feeling bad? And they go, oh, it's because you left those shoes and socks there, and because I've got the train to get. It's that kind of we blame the other person, but it was the stress we were under and we hadn't looked at it. And they're doing the same. And sometimes it's because we blame them about leaving the shoes out, and they're resentful and they're like, right, I'm going to get back. And then something happens, like, look, you've done this. And so it becomes this constant thing. And when you link that back to what Stan Tatkin talks about, two nervous system clashing, two little children saying, do you love me? Will you be there for me? Can I trust you? Looking for that adoration that we got as babies. And when we're not getting that, we say, well, this mustn't be love. You mustn't be the one. And that's when people give up and then move on to and go, well, if you're not the one and this isn't true love, then I need to go and find my one. And so if you look at dating profiles, if you look at how people explain it, they talk about, I need to find my prince, I need to find my one, I need to get this happily ever after. So you can say to, like I tell people about this fairy tale frame and go, yeah, but I don't believe that. But you might not believe it in conversation intellectually, but neurologically, that's what your behavior is showing me that is wired into your system. So when you look at, you can see, it's like I often say, don't what someone says, what someone does is more significant than what they say, because people will say anything that's easy. What they do is what they really believe. And in the same way, if you look at people's behaviors, intellectually, they can tell you in great detail about relationships, but their behavior acts from the fairy tale framework. So if you look at what people do in relationships, you can see the level of their operating system. So that whole neurology is what I call the relationship operating system. This is the framework that we get, and we can go and learn some technique. But if we're operating from a different framework, under stress, under limited time, we're going to do what's in our neurology. So most people are playing they're playing the game of relationships as if it's a lottery, that they have this one ticket and they hope, but they're not sure it's going to work. And if you look at it more, it's projects, processes, and practices. What are the practices I need to do? What are the processes to achieve the projects that I want on my relationship journey? Then it's not about it's not down to luck, which is where the anxiety of most people are, like, going back from the days of Cupid. Oh, if only Cupid fires his arrow, that's what it's going to take for me to live happily ever after. But when we see it's not about luck, and it's the luck of just happening to bump into the one. It's about what we do. And this is why it's more about the relationship journey than a relationship, because the person you're with, or the person that you get into a relationship with, may not. So this is like where people say, yeah, but you can do all this, but what about the other person? Well, then it's about how you navigate. If someone isn't capable of giving you the relationship that you want, then that's their choice. It's not about control and making them different, but it's about how you respond to that. You can't have there are some people that you can't have that relationship with. But then if you want, so the quality of the relationship you want is more important than a specific partner. Because if you lock on to this specific partner, which so many people do, like Derek in accounting is a hunk, and he's the man I want to be in a relationship with. And so it makes a change from Dorothy accounts. But if you lock on to one of these people and you say, oh, I need to win them, how am I going to, right, I'm going to wear this dress or this makeup and tempt him and get him into a relationship. Well, then you're stuck with his or her neurology and how willing and capable he is to go with you on that journey. Whereas if what you hold is, and ultimately what we want a relationship for, which we talked about this the other day, for connection, we want to feel connected to someone because we have this deep need for connection, to belong. And if we hold on to what we want is the feeling, the connection, the belonging, the supportive life partner, or whatever it is, if we hold on to that, then everyone's out there. And if we're not seeing them, it's because of our perceptual filters. And because of that, it's about what's the story we're telling, what's the anxiety that we're feeling. So relationships are really within our grasp, but it's not about an individual relationship, but about the relationship you want. So you can't say, this is the relationship I want, and this is the person I want that relationship with, because they might not go together. So you have to be flexible on who, but hold to what you want. And the relationship is to enrich your life. So it's not a particular person, but the quality of the relationship that enriches your life. So this has been one long monologue. So we never had any breakout or conversations, but I kind of went on a rant there. Does anyone have any questions or?
Rob, I have
comment?
a question with regards to framework and the whole love is a lottery thing, because I think I'm kind of confused. Studies have shown that most successful relationships are not from love, but they're from arranged marriages. But if you look at the framework that is built of arranged marriages, we have marriages whereby the woman is expected to stay at home and take care of the husband. The woman does not have that much freedom. Yet this is where success in marriage is being viewed as. So what does that say? Do we have to follow that framework, or do we continue with the whole dating love, which has been shown that the longer you date, the more likely you're gonna get a divorce after getting married?
Okay, so we have to look at, yes, arranged marriages work better. So why? So I think arranged marriages work, they work particularly well because people go into them without much expectation. People go into them. Okay, so people who date typically get into a relationship from lust, from excitement, from their idea of what will make a relationship. They have, if you look at Helen Fisher's idea of the romantic drive, of where it will last for about 3 years, that's a great time dating. You feel great on dates with someone. It's all new. You get into a domestic relationship, which is completely different from dating. And you get into a relationship or marry someone based on how you feel initially. And then after 3 years, it drops down. And people don't understand why. And they go, oh, this isn't the person. But it's because they expected. So this is something I always think of, is that if you were at a wedding, the two people, and there's always someone that goes, marriage is a hard work and you've got to work at it and you've got to talk and you've got to compromise and all these kind of things that people say. And the couple go, yeah, but it's different because we both want the same things and we're so alike and we're so good and we love each other so much. And so it's the lie that love is enough, because love is how you feel in the moment. And as soon as someone starts leaving the clothes on the floor and starts leaving the toothbrush off and forgets your birthday and all of these things, you no longer love them. But it's because people are get into a relationship with someone that they, based on their feeling. And it's a feeling that a lot of it is lust, a lot of it is hope and anxiety. And a lot of it is not really about the person. Okay, so that's kind of abstract, but let's make it more specific. So people in arranged marriages, first of all, there's an expectation you're going to stay. So this goes to what Sarah was talking about of couples work, because the expectation is that you're going to work at it. So you could get along with most people. Like if you lived in a, again, it's about thresholds of how sensitive you are and whatever. But if you've lived with people at uni, if you've had flatmates, all of these things, you can get along with someone. Now, people in arranged marriages get along like that. And so without the distraction of, do you love me? Will you be there for me? All of those things, people are able to get along, but there isn't so much anxiety towards it. Does that make sense?
I can address me and
Gina.
Gina's question regarding women are expected to stay home in most arranged marriages. I don't think that's the case in China. I guess it depends on different cultures and different families. My parents have arranged marriage, and lots of people in their generations also have arranged marriage. They usually last for life. Although there is, which it doesn't mean they don't have problems. They have lots of problems, but I think there are a few reasons. Sorry, first I'd like to address, not all women serve their husband. Like my parents, in their relationship, actually my mom is the guide and my dad is the helper, the executor. One pattern I have detected is that in arranged marriages, actually the couples are very, very complementary. They're generally speaking opposites in terms of both personalities and skill sets, and they complement each other very well. I believe they don't meet by chance. There is a divine spiritual force behind their matching. And that's why they're so complementary. And usually there are sufficient amount of conflicts in the marriage or relationship which help both of them to grow or even transform. And another reason that arranged marriages usually last for life is because when people enter into arranged marriages, they actually have given up their self-will. They let matchmaker or God to decide for them. So they are not arrogant and delusional in terms of believing that they know what they want. So they are actually more humble in that sense. That's another reason. Arranged marriages last longer. And I'd like to address another point that I personally believe. I believe there is the one. And believing that there is the one person out there for all of us doesn't make things more complicated. It makes things much more simpler. And we don't have to worry about our attractiveness because we'll be attractive enough for the one that's meant for us. And usually they will have a similar level of attractiveness so that we don't have to compete. If we don't believe there is the one, then every person is our competitor within our gender. And that's very, very stressful. And also by believing the one, actually, then we are more willing to, the one is what we are meant to be with. Then we are more willing to put in efforts to make the relationship work. We will not walk away easily because we know we have no other choice. This is the only person that we got. So we have to take the ultimate responsibilities and put in the maximum amount of effort to make the relationship or marriage work. So we're not going to walk away easily. So that's another way, my perspective on believing the one. For me, I think it eliminates lots of doubts. Oh, am I missing out on something better? No, because this is what I have got. The only person I have got, he's the one. I don't have to, I can ponder about other possibilities. This is my only possibility. So.
Okay, thank you, Fei Wu. I think we have to look at cultural. Our culture is wired into our neurology, and so when you look at arranged marriages, like Fei Wu says, a lot of it is because culturally they're built for that relationship, and so all those expectations and those kind of things are trained into someone. And yeah, in different cultures have different relationship styles. Nicole.
Oh, you're right there. I just wanted to ask, earlier you mentioned about 3 drives, and you said that the romantic drive was one of them. I just wondered what the other 2 were. I think I missed them.
Sex drive. So the
Sorry.
sex drive.
Yeah.
Sex drive gets us out looking like being attracted to people. The romantic drive narrows it down to 1, and deep companionship. And she believes from her research that it's biological. And so what we're looking at, and so this is like, why do people put their relationships at risk to cheat? Why do people, so if you want to look at people cheating, often it's because of the sex drive, but that in itself isn't enough. But often it is, when you look at that peak of a relationship, that 3-year peak where it's at like the most blissful, the most exciting, the most passionate. Well, when that goes down, and if the relationship is now starting to drain, and someone feels that they're not getting any attention, they're not, there's no spark, and like Derek from accounts or Dorothy from wherever, like you see them and you're having that spike there, people go, oh, but this is the person I really love. This is the person. And that's really the romantic drive. And so the way that you make relationships from that curve is you develop the deep companionate. And I think arranged marriages, well, that's what they do, is they might not have the romantic drive, or might not even be the attraction initially, but they have that deep companionate drive. And ultimately, a great relationship is really a great friendship. It's obviously it's a great friendship with sex and passion and intimacy and that, but the foundation of it is the friendship. Because if you don't have the friendship, the rest won't work. If you have the friendship, you can build everything else. Well, if you have the potential. So what I mean is, like, you can have a great passionate relationship, really like for, and you have all of that lust and stuff. But if that's all you have, it's just lots of great make-up sex and huge dramatic breakups. But if what you're looking for is like a 20, 30, 50-year relationship, that's really the deep companionship. And so obviously it's got to be someone that you're sexually attracted to, because otherwise you're going to have no passion. But most of, so this is where there's contradictory. So Esther Perel will say you shouldn't be affectionate. She says that there's two polarities of lust and familiarity. And so I think, personally, I think she's taken facts and taken the wrong story. Or I think, because she says, like, if you're too affectionate, you're hugging and you're too much, there's too much familiarity and you won't have the lust. And so she says you should kind of keep a distance. Whereas John Gottman, they find that really at the basis of a great sex life is a couple that have great connection. Because what usually gets in the way of the intimacy is the resentment about the shoes on the floor, the toothpaste up, the toilet seat up. And then we're not, we don't feel open because we're resentful, we've got all this anger, we feel hurt, and so we close down sexually.
So I vote for separate living quarters. You can do what you want in your bedroom. You can live at your pigsty for all I care. When you come out, just be clean.
Why are you looking at me, Sandra?
No, Sandra, it has been shown actually to be successful if couples take separate bedroom. There was a study done.
Yeah, the Victorians, I think, had it right with the gentleman's, what was it, his dressing room, etc. So he could do all that he wanted inside there, and I wouldn't have to see. Maybe we should go back to that. That's mystery for you.
When I talked in the first day one, I talked about we come from the age of control, we're in the age of confusion, but we're moving towards the age of choice. And I think, yeah, it's individual about, we've all got different thresholds of what we can live with tidiness, what we can live with emotional intimacy, libido. It's all thresholds. And so the right relationship, there's no one, this is the perfect relationship and everybody needs to do this. It's what's right for you. What is the relationship that serves you? And so it starts with a bigger awareness of what do you need to be happy? And then who is the person that is capable of that relationship that can make you happy? So yeah, I think it's individual.
But then
maybe you text, please.
Hold on. Let Sandra finish first.
I was going to say, but then shouldn't we, as young adults, when we're young adults, getting into a relationship phase of life, that is when we need to start understanding who we are. But nothing ever, we never get any training or any questions or any sessions with anybody that can point us to have a proper discussion with ourselves as to what actually we are about at that phase. Because of course we're young, we're immature, we're still not mature enough, but we begin the process then of learning how to define ourselves and understand what it is that really pleases us.
Yeah, but again, it's because politically, schools are about producing economically productive, law-abiding citizens, and so no one's going to care about your happiness. No one cares about your relationships, and so that's why we don't have anybody at work. That's why there is no curriculum.
What about the church? The church, for me, the church really is a social club. It's a, it's a social organization. It takes care of, it's supposed to take care of the flock and, well, and the shepherd. That could be a place wherein people have these kinds of discussions too. Of course, without it being so grounded in following a particular path. It
could, but then they have their own belief system of, we talked about before, that sex is bad and all of that, and they have their own goal. Any organization is going to have its own goals. And
sort of need neutral territory, really, don't we? A new kind of neutral territory to be able to educate.
Yeah, I think we've reached a point where it's like a breaking point of lots of things in society, and I think we're reaching a point where the political system and all these kind of systems are going to break down, as in they're not going to serve us for what people now want, because up till now, until like 1920, 1930, 1940, there was no welfare system, and it was a struggle to survive. It's only in definitely last century that we've become rich enough, and it's only really, and when we're talking about we've become rich enough, it's the Western economies have become rich enough that physical survival is no longer a struggle. But for most of the world, or a lot of the world, there is still that daily struggle, and so there's not been a focus. So survival was enough. This is why marriage was an economic unit throughout the agricultural period. Now people want emotional satisfaction, and so we've got a framework that's built for survival, which is, as in the arranged marriages, is built for survival, but we have expectations of emotional satisfaction, and so now our generations and younger generations want more satisfaction and want more happiness, and so the old structures are going to break. So I think in 100 years, there will be relationships and happiness on a curriculum. The government, or different governments, have talked for 15 years about making happiness on the school curriculum, but haven't done anything, because what wins, that's not necessarily that's going to win votes. It's not necessarily what's in people's concerns. So, and it's also really, if you look at it individually, it's not what we value. If you look, like if we each looked at where we spend our money, how much money have you spent on learning to be happy, on self-awareness, on relationships? And how much have you spent on iPhones and things like that? So individually, if you look, where you spend your money shows what you're valuing. And when you multiply that as a society, that's where economically, this is why Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi get 30 million a year and a nurse gets 30 grand a year. It's because of value, and value comes from not what we speak about, but from where we spend our money. Because, and we have a vote, but we vote for lower taxes, we vote for all these things. But we vote once every 4 years or so. But we actually, we vote with our money every time we earn money and spend money. Fei Wu, sorry, you've been very patient.
Yes, I'd like to share my view on libido and sex drive. I think a lot of people lie to themselves and to other people, but one thing they cannot lie is sex. Sex is actually about ourselves. it's a self-expression, and we're only attracted to partners that reflect our own values. If we think we are unworthy, we'll be sexually attracted to unworthy partners. If we are worthy, we'll be attracted to partners who are worthy.
What do you mean by worthy or unworthy?
If you know your deepest convictions, your values, and whatever your values are at any given point of your life, you'll be attracted to partners that reflect your values and your ideal of yourself at the time.
Can I just ask a question, Fei Wei?
Yes.
Okay, you have a choice for one hot night. It is Tom Hardy or the Dalai Lama.
I don't know either of them. Dalai Lama,
Okay.
definitely.
Who is the most attractive film star?
Brad Pitt is quite attractive, but I don't know his character. I only know.
Okay. Let me just ask you this question. Right, you've before expressed.
That he's too old.
Okay, you've before expressed an admiration for Jordan Peterson, wasn't that?
Yes, but obviously.
Okay. One hot night, you can have Brad Pitt or you can have Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. If those were the only two choices I have to make.
Okay.
But for me, the most attractive person is my boyfriend. I don't find anyone else attractive.
Right. So, well, we've run over again. But before we go, if anyone has any closing thoughts or comments or insights they'd like to share to everyone else.
Well, the reason I'm not attracted to anyone else is because I believe my boyfriend is the one, so I don't waste time on other people. And he's currently not my ideal. It doesn't reflect my highest values yet. And I'm in the process of getting him to change, to transform him. I'll keep you guys updated with the progress.
Does he want to change?
Yes, but he's very resistant.
Well, good
but
luck.
he's very attracted to me sexually. So that means I reflect his highest values, but because of his past conditioning.
Is that an example of lower your expectations?
No, because for me to trust him, for me to have a healthy relationship with him, he's currently a narcissist. He has to change to become his ideal, because otherwise I cannot trust him. And
So
we
you've
cannot have a
taken on
relationship.
So you've taken on a project then?
Yes, and it's incredibly rewarding because I have been transformed myself through the process. I've got rid of lots of my limiting beliefs, prejudice, bias. It's very challenging, but very, very rewarding.
All the best.
Thank you.
Stephen.
You talked about projects, processes, and practices. Are those something you're going to talk about another day or in more depth?
Friday, we're going to talk about 7 projects, 7 problems,
Okay.
7 projects.
Something that you might find interesting is a guy called Alain de Botton. He is a historian, a trained historian, master philosopher, and author. And he's done various books about the Romantic movement and that the effect of the Romantic movement on the Western ideals of love, and it ties in with some of the things that you said, and I think you might find that worth looking at.
Yeah, I've heard the name before. Someone
He's
else
got
has
some.
mentioned
He's got some great YouTube videos. Some of them, 2 of them, where he's talking in the Sydney Opera House. So, you know, he's pretty well respected.
it. Okay, thank you.
I listened to his you don't marry the wrong person. I don't agree with that. The reason he has that belief is because he has never been truly loved. So he's cynical.
I guess it's all down to that perception thing, though, isn't it? Really.
And the assumptions. All of us, life is about, we have to operate on assumptions. And the results that we get show us whether our assumptions are accurate or not. So I think everything is a hypothesis. That it's like the old saying in advertising, 50% of, I think it was John Wanamaker said that 50% of what I spend on advertising is wasted, but I don't know which 50%. And it's the same thing in half of what we believe about everything in life, about relationships, is false. Half of this I've talked about tonight is probably false. But we only know, like, we have to have something to operate on. Because if you look at, if we believed the same that we believed 2,000-3,000 years ago, we would say that the world, like just 2,000 years ago, the world revolves around, like it's like the sun revolves around the earth. The earth was flat. Everything we discover, everything we learn, is because we find the assumptions are false. And it's just about being open and sensitive. When I talked about piloting the plane, it's being sensitive. What's the assumption and what's false?
Before you commit to a relationship, do a risk analysis, identify the hazards, look at their impact, and see whether you can manage, mitigate, or you need to depart.
Shall we do a special risk assessment as well?
And the exit is over here.
So we need a date risk assessment. Okay. Okay. Anyone else got anything to share before we go? Okay, thank you everyone. And tomorrow we are talking about, so there is really 3 core things that we're talking about: think free, be strong, and share joy. So it's so tomorrow we're going to talk about think free. Have a good evening.
Can I just quickly ask? Cheers. Thanks, Rob.
Right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Rob.
See you tomorrow.